Think before you speak, read before you think. It's a quote that I love by Fran Lebowitz. She's a very successful writer and public speaker. But my name's Ryan. I'm back here for another video. This is a video that I've been wanting to make for a long time, one that has been on my priority list. So let's get into it. Okay, so I'm sure that by now in this life that you've lived, you have heard from at least a couple people about books that have impacted their life in a certain way, books that have transformed their ways of thinking. And that's, I think, one of the things that books do such a good job of doing is deconstructing our views of the world, deconstructing our ideas that are somehow stuck, ways of thinking that leave us laminated in a certain way of perceiving reality in our daily life. I think it's important to shift these lenses so that you can live with more clarity, understanding, compassion, going about your daily life. So, going through my library, I had about 20 books that I would have loved to put on this list. I have way too many to choose from, but I decided to take the top 5 that I think have transformed my life the most so far, and these are my picks. So number 5 on the list is The Motivation Manifesto by Burchard. The subtitle for this book is 9 Declarations to Claim Your Personal Power. Now, the reason why this is last on my list, last but not least, is that it was honestly the first book that I went out of my way to read on my own. I remember I was walking through the bookstore and I came across this book and it looked really cool. It's got this like shininess to it. It looked very epic looking. Something called my name. It said, "Ryan, read me."
It was like a sign, like your book was calling out to me.
Read me.
On the back, there's a quote by Paulo Coelho, the writer of The Alchemist, another great book that y'all should check out if you haven't yet. Says, "The Motivation Manifesto is a poetic and powerful call to reclaim our lives and find our own personal freedom. It's a triumphant work that transcends the title, lifting the reader from mere motivation into a soaringly purposeful and meaningful life." I love this book. That's what Paulo Coelho said. If that guy's saying that this book is good, it's worth at least reading the first couple pages. And what this book does best is giving you that push that really forces you to go out of your comfort zone to achieve your goals and set aside organizational techniques and setting aside time to really take a look at what you tell yourself that is stopping you from achieving your goals. I remember it took me I took my time on reading this book. I really didn't rush through it. I kind of used it as a daily practice, right? I would wake up and I would read like 10 pages of it and then kind of really ponder that throughout the day. Next day I would do the same. And I noticed that I was shifting into a more productive frame of mind. And then I really noticed, wow, reading can really do a lot for me. Maybe I should start reading more. So this book may or may not be the best self-help book out there, but what it did for me personally was it really started my journey into using books as a tool to further my path. Definitely check it out if you get a chance. Again, it's The Motivation Manifesto by Burchard. I'll put a link in the description. Number 4 on my list is Love Between Equals, Relationship as a Spiritual Path. It's written by a lady named Young-Eisendrath. She's a PhD psychotherapist / Buddhist teacher, so her therapy techniques are more based on mindfulness, and this one I'm actually still in the middle of reading. I'm about halfway through, but it's taught me so much that I thought I'd have to put it on this list. This book is specifically about communication, specifically about looking at the ideas and stories that we tell ourselves about our partner. This book is not only aimed at taking a look at your relationships with a spouse or significant other, but also coworkers, friends, family. It really teaches you about getting in deep into the relationship and really taking the time to develop it with some depth instead of just settling on immediate mediocre relationship that you think is just normal, because even in relationships, though they are intense and take some work, they're not meant to be miserable, and that's what this book reminds us of, and gives us a lot of tools into really dissecting the ways that we look at our partner, the stories that we tell, the excuses that we make, the pointing fingers. That's a big thing that it goes over, and gives you some really beneficial ways that you can learn to communicate with your partner in a more peaceful and calm manner. One of the big takeaways that I got out of this book so far is it really talks about the tendencies that almost all relationships have to, at a 6-month, an 8-month, or a year mark, fall out of the honeymoon phase and into the reality of a relationship through disillusionment. Disillusionment is a term that means basically getting used to your relationship and all the parts of it that have made you infatuated, and then coming to reality and seeing your partner for who they truly are outside of your infatuated perception, which kind of dilutes your view of your partner in the first place. As happy as it makes you and as awesome as that part of the relationship is, it never lasts, unfortunately, and that's where the work is to be done, is to learn how to live with your partner and love your partner more genuinely and more deeply, which really holds the grounds for you to form more intimacy with your partner, which is so rare nowadays. Who'da thunk it? So if you're struggling to communicate in your relationship, or you're struggling to let go of toxic tendencies, this book is definitely one to take a look at. The one thing that I will say is this book is very heady. Being a psychology major, I've taken some psychology classes that have helped me, I would say, prepare to read a book like this. There's a lot of terms in here that I had forgotten about and had to really kind of look back and be like, oh yeah, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? It's definitely a book to read slowly and take your time with. But I hope that you get a lot out of it regardless. Okay, on to number 3 on my list. This book is entitled The End of Your World by one of my favorite spiritual teachers, Adyashanti. This guy right here. It's definitely not a book that's for everybody. It's, I would say, a handbook for those who have had any sort of spiritual awakening. Anybody who has come to the realization of mind being, well, the mind, and thoughts being nothing but our thoughts, and not having any true hold on what reality entails. When I say that it's not for everybody, what I mean is that it is very, if you haven't had any of the experiences that he talks about in this book, then you might be like, what is he talking about? It might be a little weird, it might be a little new agey, unless you've had the experiences that he speaks of. But if you have had any sort of spiritual awakening, this book is extremely relatable, makes you realize that you're not crazy, and it also really gives you a roadmap for navigating life once you have had the realization that kind of blasts you open like that. Because once you have a spiritual awakening of any kind, it can be very disorienting, it can be very confusing, and this book not only has Adyashanti telling of his own accounts that he's had after his spiritual awakening, but he also goes into people that he has worked with, students of his that have come to him with experiences that he has helped them through. And after I went through my own awakening, I needed this book at the exact time that it fell in my lap. And it's a book that I've actually read like 3 times now, and it's one that I'll probably read again in the future. And even with this book, if you haven't had any sort of intense major spiritual experiences that you know of, yet you are interested in meditation or what meditation might bring into your life, if you keep it up, this book is something that will definitely save you a lot of trouble and save you from a lot of roundabouts that might keep you spinning in circles for a bit. Definitely worth checking out if that sounds intriguing to you. Alright, and number 2 on my list is a book called The Mastery of Love by Don Miguel Ruiz. This is the same guy that wrote The Four Agreements. Almost everybody has heard of that book. Great book, by the way. Was tempted to put that one on my list, but I would say that this one specifically impacted me a lot more over than The Four Agreements did. But definitely check out The Four Agreements if you haven't yet. This one specifically, The Mastery of Love, is a book that I read at the perfect time that I needed it the most. Story time. I was on a trip to Joshua Tree with my girlfriend and another friend of ours, and it was about 3 months into our relationship, I want to say, 3 or 4, and as most relationships tend to lead to at one point or another, being together for 5 days straight, in a packed car, in the heat, it was definitely a test to our patience and our might when it comes to dealing with each other's differences. And so I'm a sensitive person. I'm somebody that takes things very personally, right? I'm somebody that can jump to the worst conclusion as soon as anything happens. And reading this book while I was on the trip really helped me to, A, love myself. As cheesy as it sounds, loving yourself is #1 key to sustaining any relationship, in my opinion. It's the only thing that has helped me to really hold on to any relationship that I've been in, is to love myself first instead of relying on love from another person. Because as soon as you put your happiness in somebody else's hands, then it's a huge risk into letting yourself take things personally and be so affected by things that are really never personal in the first place. And I just remember coming home from this trip and finishing this book. It led me to a series of eye-opening moments that really made me feel more love for my partner than I ever had before. Really seeing her for who she truly is and appreciating all of it to the utmost, and letting go of every single other idea I had of what I needed to feel loved, as well as what I needed my partner to be. This book really stripped all that away and has helped me to, since then, guide me back to that place of just loving myself and not putting my happiness in anybody else's hand, so that I may love so much more purely and powerfully, and feel loved just as powerfully. Says this on the back of the book: the mastery of love includes why domestication and the image of perfection lead to self-rejection, the war of control that slowly destroys most relationships, why we hunt for love in others and how to capture the love inside of us, and finally how to finally accept and forgive ourselves and others. Those are the 4 main points that this book goes over. And I think it's necessary for anybody to read that is in a relationship, not only with their significant other, but with friends and people that we hold dearly closest to us. So definitely check it out. All right, and #1 on the list, the coup de grace of all books that I have ever read. It is A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. Those of you that know Eckhart Tolle, he wrote the book The Power of Now. This book right here is one that you can't get me to shut up about it. I consider it my Bible. I've given it to, I think, 4 friends as gifts. I've lent it out to people and had to buy a new copy because I lost one of them. And it still keeps making its way back into my life over and over. I think I've read it 3 times now. I couldn't say enough about this book. For me, I read it at a time that I was going through a major depression. I was depressed for about 8 months, and this is a whole nother video that I'm going to make in the future about this story, but I was depressed for about 8 months straight through something that just happened in my life that I'll get into, like I said, in another video. But after being depressed for 8 months, I became completely hopeless. Nothing was helping. I tried dieting, I tried exercising, I tried journaling, I tried therapy, I tried this, I tried basically everything but medication, and I was at the point of considering it because I was getting to the point where I no longer wanted to live, and I needed something. I needed something to save me. I needed some sort of signal that life was going to be okay, and this book was that and so much more. Eckhart Tolle, he's a spiritual teacher who went through a spiritual awakening back in the 80s, I believe. He was a scholar at Cambridge and was completely depressed his entire life. I think when he was about 28, one day he woke up in the middle of the night, completely to the edge of committing suicide, and basically came to the conclusion that he no longer wanted to live. What happened next was basically a void opened up, and he said, I cannot live with myself any longer. And suddenly it clicked. He had this realization, how can I not live with myself any longer? Who is the I and who is the self that I can no longer live with? As he says, heard this voice that said, resist nothing. After having this realization, the next thing that he remembers is waking up the next morning, and he remembers looking around and only experiencing peace in everything and feeling everything as one. He felt himself in everything and felt this bliss that he had never felt once in his life.
Feels good.
Reading this book, man, it cured me. And I remember just looking up and feeling completely free. You know, everybody has their own path. This is something that I really had to learn and humble myself with, is that everybody has their own path with their own suffering. Everybody has their own journey of healing, and everybody's journey is going to be different. Everybody's journey is going to come with different techniques and antidotes that alleviate them of their own suffering. And for me, it was this book. I know I've showed this to some friends that have been just as affected as I have, but other friends have been like, oh, it was good, but you know, I read this other book that affected me more. And the reason why I prefer this book, A New Earth, over his most popular book, The Power of Now, is that he was fresh on the start of his writing career. It was a great book, but this one I feel like he's a little bit more seasoned as a writer. It's a number of years after his first book, therefore there's a lot more experience and wisdom that went into this book. There are stories that he tells of his own life and from his past, back when he was super depressed, relating it to his current way of living and thinking due to his spiritual awakening. And it's such an inspiration to show that coming out of our egos and our attachments is a birthright. It's not something that's special. It's showing that more and more people are just popping up and awakening to their true form, being pure awareness rather than this body that they live in, right? And that's the biggest takeaway that I love about Eckhart Tolle, is his accessible education into the fact that we are not our bodies, we are not our identities, we are not our stories. We are the awareness of these forms. And that right there is step one to freeing yourself of suffering, is coming to this realization that we are not that. We are everything, but we are not just that alone.
And the truth shall set you free!
And so guys, that was my list of top 5 books that have impacted my life so far. Comment down below if you end up reading any of them and let me know how they affected you. I'd love to hear some stories from you guys, and also please comment down below your top 5 books that have impacted you so far. I'd love to hear some suggestions. I'm always down to read some new books. So with that, subscribe, click on that button down below, comment, and like this video. Hope you guys are having a wonderful week, and I'll see you guys in the next video.